The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal
View. And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight I have with us Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
And I have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And tonight we got a great guest, which I could probably do 3 hours instead of 2 with. A lot of good stuff that's going to be coming. We want to let everybody know that if you do have questions tonight, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat, and we will get those answered for you. So, because we have a lot of information to try and go over tonight, we want to let Jeff go ahead and introduce our guest.
Well, tonight's guest is filmmaker Christopher Tillman, writer-director of Legends of the Heartland, Life and Crimes of Return Ward, Volume 1. Christopher is the founder of Haunted Toledo and its YouTube channel, for which he is the primary content creator and executive producer for Haunted Toledo's digital streaming and broadcast television content. So welcome, fellow filmmaker Christopher Tillman.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. And before we get into the legends of the Heartland, because it's a really great story, so we want to get into that, but I want to find out a little bit about you. How did you get into the paranormal to start with?
The subject has been with me since I was a kid. It started with like stories of Bigfoot, and the ghost stuff didn't come along till later because I was scared to death as a kid of ghosts. But like UFOs and Bigfoot and just all these weird stories that you would see in the library, those library books and shows like In Search Of on TV, Ripley's Believe It or Not. It's just always fascinated me that these things are out there, could be out there, what was really going on, things like that. And then it slowly delved into, the hauntings. And is there something after death? Can people come back? All those stories just started to really fascinate me. And then after high school, I decided I'm just going to go out and start looking for this stuff on my own, and it just really, it grew from there almost to the point of an obsession almost.
Well, that was me to an extent. Of course, I was always afraid to start with, and some people actually, I started getting in this site here on ParaX in 2008, and the owners at the time got to be good friends with me, and they talked me into going on an investigation with them at the Sorg Opera House. And I said, who, me? Into a place that's haunted? No way. But they talked me into it. And after I had did that, they, in 2 months, by November of 2008, they had talked me into doing this radio show. So I've been doing that since 2008 in the fall. And I now can go places and do things because if you wanted to really understand that there is life after death or ghosts or spirits, when you start investigating and you actually start getting audio on your recorder that comes from nowhere. You don't even hear it most of the time when you catch it. And it's not put on there by anything other than spirits. And I feel that they're here with us. They're all around. And it's just like they're living their own life, whether it's repeated or they have a conscience and know what's going on, which I feel I've got answers before from questions. So that has to be something pointing to that. So have you gotten a lot of good audio?
Yeah, I've heard some EVPs that we've captured that cannot be explained through any other means than, paranormal. These are voices they're very clear. There's no, when other people hear it, there's no discussion over what's really being said. Everybody hears clearly what's being said, and we all know that there was nothing else in the room saying that word or those words. But it still mystifies me. How is that possible? I believe the stuff exists, and now I'm to the point where I want to know why it exists. I want to know how it exists. How can a spirit put their voice on a piece of audio, but our own ears can't pick it up? I've gone from, yes, this stuff is real, to now I want to know what makes it work. I want to know how it works. And I think that's, I think everyone should be asking that question a lot more, because that's how we're going to learn to build better, gadgets and gizmos to be able to actually capture this evidence. Life does go on in some form, some way. So for me, that question's already been answered. Now I want to know, what's it like over there? Why do they come back? Why do they stay here? You gotta figure the afterlife has got to be amazing. It's got to be, you can do almost anything, I would imagine. Why would you stick around here? I'd be out exploring.
Or the question is, are they here because it exists on, heaven, hell, earth are all the same thing?
Right. I mean, there's a concept of the singularity, that there is no such thing as time on the other side. There's no such thing as location. It's just everything's there at that moment happening, or it's a hard concept to wrap my mind around, but I'm very interested in learning as much as I can about it.
So in that process, are you using new equipment? Are you branching out into, say, oscilloscopes or full spectrum cameras? How exactly are you attempting to quantify?
Well, when it comes to like what we do at Haunted Toledo, the focus still remains on the history and the stories, and recording people's experiences and trying to document, if we can, some of those same experiences. But then in like what I do off camera, I'm getting more into how do we create better gear to do what we do. And I'm starting to look more towards the microwave portion of the spectrum. I think, we got some good gear now, but we're stuck looking at the radio frequency part of the spectrum. We're stuck looking at the visible and the infrared light part. I think what we really need to be looking at is the microwave portion, because a lot of when you look at what happens when people are exposed to microwave radiation, you start to see some of the very same things that people claim to experience when they're exposed to haunting phenomena. Mm-hmm. I have a friend of mine who's big into computers and the Arduino stuff, or however you pronounce that, and he's like, I can build some of this stuff for you. So I'm putting my pennies together, and we're gonna maybe try to build some prototype pieces of equipment.
Well, for microwave detection, that's really interesting.
I mean, I wouldn't say we're going like deep into the microwave portion, but we're just, mm-hmm. I think it's right there at the very edge. I think we just need to push a little bit further, and we might be able to develop something that is able to hopefully document this stuff better. I mean, a lot of people say that it's a common claim that they'll hear a voice, but they're not hearing it with their ears. They're hearing it in their own head. And there's some patents out there where they talk about voice to skull transmission using microwaves.
Yes.
So it's like, well, why aren't we looking at the microwave? I mean, so that's why I'm trying to figure out how to build some of this stuff, or how to, where to find people that could build some of this stuff, and how much it's going to cost, and is it safe to use, safe to operate this, something like this? Because I think we can all rest assured that the paranormal does not happen in the gamma part of the spectrum or the X-ray part of the spectrum, because if it did, we'd all be dead.
Yep.
So a little, if we venture just a little bit into the microwave portion, I think that's where we're going to find a lot more answers.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah. There is a lot of technology out there where they're beaming advertising into your heads when you walk down the street so that you are focused on one thought. So it wouldn't surprise me. You're absolutely right. Now, whether or not they have the technology to actually detect it, I don't know. I'm assuming if they built it to project it, that they built it to detect it as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would think so.
Great out-of-the-box thinking.
Now, we had a great friend, Mike Stevenson, known as the Paranormal Man. He's from Maryland. And he was into all this electronic stuff, and he was taking and building things, because he would sit there and tell you how they speak to us. It's through thought. And I mean, he was real good. He unfortunately passed this past year, and we really hated to see that, because he was always with us when we go to Gettysburg, or when they'd have a convention sometimes over here at Post Town. He would come over to that, and he was into all that real good, and he could sit there and talk to you for hours and show you all kinds of stuff. And I don't know if he's still got stuff, if they still got it up on his site called The Paranormal Man, but he would go into all that stuff, and how much he's put on there and it's still there, I don't know.
It's definitely worth checking into. Well, a very good read, if you can find a copy of this book. And now I can't even remember the title. Darn it. It's from like the 1900, 1901, 1902, somewhere in there. It was published by Myers. He was a member of the Society for Psychical Research in London. And he gave one of the most fascinating theories for what ghosts really are. That, much like what was being said, that they speak to you through energy. They contact you through energy. And what it is like your mind is a receiver, and this paranormal energy is like a transmission. And if your mind, the receiver, isn't tuned to the right station, you're not going to even pick up the transmission. You're not going to have any type of experience. And if you're kind of on the right station, but not, you're just off the dial a little bit, then you're only going to get partial information. And if you're tuned in right to the transmission, of course, then you're gonna be able to see all this information coming through. And so the mind is like this receiver, and when people have an experience and they see something and they're not tuned in just the right way, that the brain kind of fills in the gaps. And that's where we get the archetype of the phantom lady in white that everybody sees. And it's just a really cool explanation about what this energy could be and how we perceive it. And he goes on to say that if you do see a spirit in front of you, that you're not really seeing it. Your mind is projecting this hallucination, because you're dialed into this energy, and your mind is processing it, and it gives you a visual to look at. And based on how well you're tuned in to the transmission will depend on how clearly you see the spirit as it's intended to be seen. So some people can go into a haunted building and they'll see like this woman wearing a dark robe, and she has long white hair, and they'll see her very clearly. And then other people go into the building, their mind isn't as tuned in, and their brain kind of fills in the gaps, and they see like the Phantom Lady in white. It's a really fascinating theory, and I think that falls in line with like the microwave stuff, that we have to develop technology that allows us to really help us tune into what's going on. If we can see like a waveform of this energy in the microwave spectrum, and we can figure out how to tune into it, maybe we can gather even better EVPs, maybe more clear EVPs. Because I think a lot of what we're doing now, we're missing a lot of information, even with like the audio recorders. I think they're not up to gathering information like that, so we get these little bits and pieces.
Yeah, I know.
Earlier you
Jeff.
said whether the audible voices that were heard might be inside the head as opposed to outside of the ear. I once had a ghost whisper into my right ear to the point I just thought my girlfriend at the time had snuck up on me. And I've also seen investigative videos where a voice will suddenly be heard in the distance of a building, and everybody stops because they all heard it. Now, I can understand maybe if one person, it was in the head, but it seemed like it was in the ear. But if multiple people hear it, is that possible that it's not in their head? Especially
Yeah, in fact, I think if you have like a group experience like that, I think that's evidence of like a really powerful experience. Because the way I look at ghosts is like, all right, let's say tomorrow morning you wake up dead, you're a ghost. You'll be like an infant, like a child. You have to relearn how to manipulate the environment all over again. So for a ghost to be able to actually cause vibrations in the air and produce a sound, that's something that it probably would take them a long time to learn, and they would need a lot of energy to do it. Actual physical manifestation of the world like that, whether it's moving something or producing vibrations in the air to create sound, that's got to be takes a lot of energy, I would think, to do that. So for mass experiences like that, yeah, I think you're dealing with something that is definitely paranormal. I mean, definitely. If you're just hearing a voice in your head, there's scientists have. It happens a lot when people are in bed. Just as they about to fall asleep, they'll hear a knocking sound, or they'll hear someone call their name, and scientists say that that's it's your brain misfiring or something. They have a word for it. So if you're hearing stuff in your head, then you're always questioning, is that really something weird going on, or am I just my brain full of me? But if you have like a mass experience like that, where you have two or more people that are experiencing the same thing at the same time, and they all agree that it's the same, the experience is the same from one person to the next, to me, that's a very powerful display of paranormal energy.
Well, I've definitely had the experience of like being in that twilight, nearly asleep, and heard a voice suddenly shout my name, and it would just jolt me awake. But I'm like, what was that? I attributed that more to being probable a dream state than anything in the room.
Yeah, it's weird because I think everybody's had that experience, but it's like, why would my own brain shout my name? This doesn't make sense. But scientists say it's just your brain is just playing tricks on you, I guess. I don't know why the brain would do that, but I tend to think half the time those things might be paranormal.
It's that subconscious going, wake up, I'm not ready yet.
I know that I work with 3 different mediums that are really good. And we were investigating in this one house where there was supposed to be a little girl that they keep seeing, and she had done things around the house and stuff. And the 3 of us were sitting here in the living room looking down the hallway to the back door, just asking questions, trying to get this little girl to talk with us. And I got my recorder going, and we're sitting there, And all of a sudden the medium said, she's standing right in front of you. I said, oh, okay. So I had my camera next to me. I was getting it ready. I was going to, see if I could take a picture and capture her. And Mark said, honey, can Henry take your picture? And on the recorder, you picked the little girl up saying, I'm smiling.
Wow.
Now, when you get stuff like that, that's an intelligent, because she's responding to the question and, take my picture type thing. Of course, I did, but I never captured anything. But we didn't hear it until you played the recorder back.
Yeah, there's definitely something out there. To me, there's no debate that this stuff is real. It exists. And for whatever reason, some people are more susceptible to it than others. And it's just a totally fascinating. It's morbid at times. It's really morbid at times, but it's just a very fascinating field to pursue studying.
Oh, well, we don't know what the subconscious will do. And I just bookmarked to read for later. Scientists are now able to converse with somebody while they're in the dream state.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so, if we can do that, and of course it's done audibly, and your brain is perceptive, why not? There's that part of your brain that is awake during the dream state. Hmm. And probably the opposite is true too. We can pick up that perceptive subconscious stuff while we're awake as well. So why wouldn't we be able to pick up auditory information?
Right. And when you look at like the EM spectrum, we're only experiencing just such a small portion of it. And we only experience what our five senses will allow us to experience. And there's just so much else going on out there that we don't even notice because we're not designed to perceive it. And who knows what could be like right next to you right now? You know what I mean? You never know. And just the possibilities are endless.
Well, based on children, I would say that we are all predisposed to be able to sense them. It's just that we're trained out of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. In fact, there's I don't remember the complete passage, but Stephen King mentioned something like that in one of his short stories, and it just made so much sense that as you grow older, you're told repeatedly, monsters don't exist, you're safe, you're fine, there's nothing going to get you, go to sleep, yada, yada, yada. And we train ourselves to ignore these things. And sometimes to the point where we never experience anything like that ever again. And then I also believe that even if you're not like super sensitive to this type of phenomena, that the more you go searching for it, the more you go to these locations and explore and try to document, I think that over time you can become a little bit more sensitive to it. And that, hopefully you don't draw nothing to you. Nobody should have an attachment. Nobody should have to deal with that. But I think that the longer you're in this field, the more sensitive to it you'll get. I think it can return that I'm not going to say it's going to turn you into a psychic or anything, but at least it's going to make you more susceptible to being able to communicate with this stuff.
Very much so. And, people always want to seem to think that mankind has evolved to its highest state now, and I'm not convinced that we are. I'm convinced that we are still evolving, and it's very possible that we're developing these senses as well. Not
right.
that people weren't psychic before, but
on an evolutionary scale, I would say that we're still, maybe we're entering our teens in terms of a species. So we're not fully there yet. We're not fully matured yet. So there's a possibility that at some point we will be able to
now before we get into the video that you made, Legends of the Heartland, excuse me, I've got a couple questions from the chat room, and the first one is from Sherry, and she said, if multiple people hear an EVP or audible voice, but hear different messages, have you heard of that before?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that happens quite a bit with us. You'll play something back, and everybody's going to have a different idea of what was heard, or you'll hear something in the moment when you're playing it back, and then a few days later, when you go to replay it again, you'll hear something completely different, or you won't hear anything at all. And I think that's just it's recorded, so it's not like your brain can't process it, but it's just maybe people hear things differently, or they're expecting to hear what they're hearing, maybe based on the questions that are being asked and their knowledge of the legend or why they're in that room to begin with. So that's one of the things we do is we do play back the EVPs on camera in the moment, so that we can continue that line of questioning, but we really don't make a firm judgment on the EVP until we wait a week or so and play it back, because usually you hear something different. It's just one of those weird things. And I think it's more about people's preconceived notions about what they're expecting to hear versus what's actually being recorded.
Okay. Let's see. I believe I had another one here, I believe. Let's see. All right. She wanted to know, I forget exactly what it was we was talking about. She says, is it that we're not designed to, or that we've been taught not to? And I would assume she was talking about hearing, I guess.
I would think that it might be a little bit of both. When you look at crowd psychology, it's very easy to get a mass group of people to believe what you want them to believe if you drum it into them enough. Madison Avenue's taught us that with marketing, So it's very easy to convince people to believe something if you constantly repeat it. But I also think that at the same time, our brains haven't fully, in terms of as a species, I don't think we've fully developed the full capacity of our brain. There's so much of it that doesn't seem to be used. It's got to be there for some reason. Nature just doesn't create something like the brain and not use 100% of it, Be an interesting thing to ask a neurosurgeon what they thought,
All right. I think if we don't have any more questions right now, we can start talking about this video that you created, Legends of the Heartland. And it is on Amazon. And if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it for free on Amazon. Excellent, excellent. And it's only part one, because you say you got two other parts that's being made for this.
Right.
The whole concept and story was, and how you started researching it was really fascinating. Did somebody contact you and saying, we have problems, you need to come and investigate? Or did you pick the story up and then just start investigating it?
Well, I had the early days of the Haunted Toledo page. I would post a different legend from across Ohio every day. And they would come from just stuff that I would hear in passing, or that I would read on a message board, or from one of the piles of clippings that I had on my desk. And I was looking for something to post, and I came across the clipping of the newspaper ad, and I had remembered hearing about the story. And I posted something on the page wanting to know, does anybody know who the ghost hunting group that investigated this particular diner? Does anybody know who they are? I'd like to talk to them and find out what they experienced. And, of course, nobody knew who the group was, but I did get some messages from former employees of the diner, the executive diner, who pretty much confirmed that they had experienced exactly what the newspaper clips were saying. And that from what they heard, it was the phenomena was still happening. And then I was off and running. Let's go talk to the employees. Let's go talk to the owner and get their stories on camera. And it was like a chain of dominoes. One thing led to another with this story. It's just, it bloomed into this huge story from out of nowhere. Totally unexpected.
And you started with the diner, and then you found out that the store or building next door also was having problems.
Yeah. With the diner, after talking to them, it was like they were written up in a book of Ohio ghost stories. And that led to that story. Then it led to another newspaper article where it talked about a murder that happened on that location. And the way they described the murder was just completely off the wall. I mean, to me, the way it was described was like somebody has seen one too many horror movies, and they've built this big legend out of nothing. So to me, that's a red flag. But they did mention the names of, the victim, Olive Ward, and her husband, Return Ward. So you have names there. It can be traced back through history. You can see if the story is true. And so all this stuff is happening almost at the same time. And I started researching the story, and there was a book written about the actual murder by a local historian called Murder in Sylvania. And it's a book where she reprints all the Toledo Blade articles that were written about this trial. And there's a lot of trial testimony in the book and a lot of like exhibit testimony. And then we find out that the murder didn't really happen at Executive Diner. It happened a few doors down where there's an Ace Hardware sitting now. And at the same time, I'm figuring out all this information out. The employees at Executive Diner are telling me that the employees in the building right next door to them, they're seeing some of the same stuff in their building, and they're seeing stuff inside Executive Diner. Because the diner closed, it's only open for breakfast and lunch. So they close in the evenings. And when the girls that work at the salon next door, they step outside for a smoke break, they'll be standing right there in front of the Executive Diner, and they're telling me they're seeing stuff moving around in the diner. They're seeing these wispy figures walking through the diner. And pretty soon it's like you step back from all this information and you're like, what the hell's going on? There's a huge story here. And it just kept unfolding from there.
So at what point did you say we have to go in here to investigate?
Oh, right off the bat. I mean, I want to be able to, I want to see if we can document some of the same stuff. We went to every location that said they were having some sort of encounter. I wanted to be able to get this stuff, as much of it as I could, on video. Executive Diner, Ace Hardware, Rebay Salon we went to, Wildwood Anglers, which is next door to Ace Hardware. We caught some amazing EVPs of what we believe is actually Return Ward. And then way down at the Wingate Hotel, which is maybe 75, 80 yards away, they're claiming they're seeing someone they believe to be Olive Ward in their building. And that one didn't make much sense at the time, but it's this whole legend. It spans this entire downtown Sylvania district, and it's just really, it's such a fascinating story. It's how are all these people experiencing all this phenomena they all claim is tied to this murder? And you wonder, are they talking amongst themselves and they want to be a part of the story, or are they actually seeing stuff? And based on our investigations, every building there's something going on in each building. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt and say that, yeah, they are probably being visited by Olive Ward and her husband Return.
Now, when you actually was getting into this, you actually went and started doing research, libraries and all kinds of other different things to check the history, and you found out a whole lot of stuff about the murder and everything, which was really interesting. How many hours did you have to spend going through documents and researching the history?
I would say, well, from the end of 2017 all the way through 2019. I mean, we got the final cut for the documentary done in spring or summer 2020, and I was doing research all the way up to the very end. There were, in the documentary, they show trial exhibits of what Return Ward's house looked like, and of the piece of jawbone that pretty much convicted him at trial. Those trial documents, I did not come into possession of those until maybe a few weeks before the final cut was done. And there's still documents coming my way. For much of 2018, I was on the phone daily with researchers and historians between here and Milan, Ohio. And when I told them the story, they decided to help out on their own, and they started digging on their own, and they're handing me documents. I'm shipping documents back to them. So it was just a really cool working relationship with all these different researchers, and which surprised me because they knew I was, not only was this like a true crime story, but I was also looking at the paranormal side of it. So it was just really thankful that they helped out the way they did. And even the Little Shiloh Historical Society, which is right down the road from where Return Ward used to live before he moved to Sylvania, they uncovered some documents about one of his first victims. So just really thankful for all this research help that came my way, and there's no way it could have been done without all that help. So much information was uncovered. It's just incredible.
Now, this murder took place like 157 years ago.
Yeah.
And what you found out was none of the town pretty much was the same as it was back when those murders took place, because the house and stuff where he lived was long gone. There had been a fire that wiped out the biggest part of the town, so you didn't have anything there, but you did come across old documents that showed what the streets looked like back at that time.
Right. And even those like maps they're not like accurate. They're not like a map we would have today. It's just a guess where different things used to sit. And so a lot of it's speculation about where exactly his house sat. And there's a couple different ideas of where it sat, and basically all the different theories, they're just a few feet off from one another. So it's like a minor point as to where exactly it was, because we know the general area, and it's pretty much that northern end of Ace Hardware and a little bit of the store next door. But yeah, and then to find where the boarding house he ran just outside of Shiloh, where he killed 2 other people, to be able to find where that actually sat. This has just been this is like one of my favorite investigations I've ever done, because I love the history part of it. I love finding all these details and all these facts and these old history books and journals and maps and everything. And I also like the ghost hunting aspect of it. So this was like the perfect storm for me. I love this story. It's a tragic story, but I love this story.
So Return Ward married this girl, Oliver Ward. They lived in a little cabin there in the town. I understand that they never did get along. Apparently she had one or two kids, I guess, and he didn't care for kids, so she sent him off to live with her relatives. Things did not get any better, though, with them because they were always arguing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the murder, how he killed her, and what happened with that?
Oh, before you do that,
Okay.
Did you investigate whatever happened to the kids?
We know that the son went back to live with his father, and we're still tracking on those leads. The daughter must have remarried at some point, and we don't know. We have to find those, like a marriage record to start with, but because of the name change, so far she's kind of lost in the paperwork right now.
Okay, but he didn't get to them.
No, they were fine. They survived.
Okay.
But
because it sounded like he wanted to kill anybody pretty much that got in his way.
Yeah, he was a real jerk. He was, and he had that reputation. People knew not to cross him. People knew to give him a wide berth. They knew not to get on his bad side. And he just had that reputation. He was like an ogre. He was the town ogre. And he was very unpredictable. When he was happy, and laughing and jovial, and he'd buy everybody around to drinks or whatever. He was that kind of guy. But if his mood would change, just like that, snap your fingers, his mood would change. And when that happened, he was unpredictable. And so he never had a whole lot of friends. And any friends he did have were pretty much the same type of people like him. And so when he met Olive, they knew each other for like 3 days and decided to get married. And there's a bit of trial testimony where it's hinted that it was more of a marriage of convenience somehow. He was upset, number one, about the kids. He did not like kids. And that was always a constant source of arguing with them. There is trial testimony that Olive had become pregnant, and he had given her something like called white coffee or white tea or something that induced an abortion. And she's her friends went on record saying that she feared for her life staying with him, that it was a mistake to marry him. It seems like she married him because she wanted to, and it seems like he married her for some other reason. Like there was maybe a financial motive to it. I've never gotten to the bottom of that, but it's just trial testimony that Return was mad at Olive's family, that they misrepresented who she was, and she's and he was just upset. That almost seems like an arranged marriage. I got that feeling just from reading that. Okay. But yeah, they argued all the time, and the houses were close together back then. The walls were thin, and everybody would remark that the Wards are fighting again, and they could just hear them screaming. And it ended up she sent her kids away. She feared for their lives, and she feared that the abuse that he heaped onto her, that he would one day start to focus on her kids, and so she sent them away. And once she did that, in her mind, the marriage was done. He had made her, separate from her own children. It's done. It's over. And she left and went back to Adrian. And he spent a week between him and the help of a friend trying to convince her to come back. He gives her the old, I'm a changed man routine, and it'll never happen again. You come back and things are going to be great, and I'll treat you right, yada, yada, yada. And she finally does agree to come back. And they're back to fighting again. They're just fighting all over again. And for some reason, she tells him that the only reason she came back was to gather whatever belongings she had left behind in the first place, that she's not staying. And that's pretty much when Ward decided she's never leaving that house alive again. And when she was in the morning, she was, packing up her things, and she was getting her shoes on and getting ready to head on out to the train to head back to Adrian. He grabbed a smoothing iron. He was a tailor, and a smoothing iron is basically just like the electric irons we have now, but they would put them on the hot coals to warm them up. And he just grabbed the iron and he clobbered her right there on the side of the head. And according to his confession, he just stood there and watched her bleed out for like 15 minutes and just stood there staring at her. And he knew that he had a real big problem on his hands now. The house is right there on Main Street, and it's the busiest part of the street. And he can't just carry the body outside to dispose of it. People would see it. So he's got to figure out, how does he cover this up? How does he hide this? And on top of that, the size of his house was 16 feet by 20 feet. It's like the size of a bedroom. So how are you going to hide this body? And his confession, when he described what he did, is the most gruesome thing I've ever read. It's very clinical, the way he tells what he did, the incisions he made, why he made them. It sounded like he was describing how to field dress a deer. Very cold. And he just decided he was going to dismember the body and burn the pieces in the stove right there in the living room. And he went into great detail about just about every cut and why he made the cut. And he goes into detail about how some organs burn better than others, and how he's curious that, if you don't poke the intestines, they'll explode from the heat. And it's just like he's learning something, and he's sharing what he's learning with the police. It's just the most surreal thing you've ever read. And people remember hearing like chopping noises late at night coming from his house. They recall hearing or seeing columns of black smoke coming from his chimney stack. And this was a February that was very mild, and not a lot of people had to burn very hot fires to keep warm, but they kept seeing Ward coming back from across the street. There was like a wagon repair shop across the street, and he got a lot of his wood shavings for the stove from this shop. And they would remark they've seen Ward go back and forth a couple times a day getting buckets of wood shavings. And they always wondered, why does he need the fire so hot? What's he doing in there? And the columns of black smoke coming from the chimney and the smell of burning meat. And people just knew something was up. Between not having seen Olive in a couple days, Return Ward is giving different stories for why she's gone to different people. And then they knew something happened. And knowing Return's reputation as being an unpredictable, violent man, they knew there was some kind of foul play going on. And they didn't have a police force back then. So it was like one guy was like a magistrate. And then one guy was like, he did law enforcement duties. And so it was a matter of getting everybody together and getting to the bottom of it in terms of what happened to Olive. In fact, the morning, right after he killed her, he wrapped her up in a blanket and put her under the bed. And the first thing he did is he went to the store and he told the shopkeeper that, if you don't see me or Olive, it's because we're going on a trip and we'll be gone for a while. And then later on in the day, he told somebody else that Olive decided she was going to move to California because she met some man out there. And so it doesn't take long for a town the size of Sylvania at that time to start comparing notes and realizing that, there's something fishy going on. But yeah, he burned the pieces of his wife in the stove. He would then take the ashes, and like in the Shawshank Redemption, when Andy Dufresne is emptying out the dirt from the tunnel he was digging into the yard, the prison yard, walking around and leave a little pile here, a little pile there. That's pretty much what Returned Ward was doing, just leaving little piles of ashes wherever he went. And some of the bones that were too big to burn, he kind of ground them down as best he could, and he would fling those like in the woods. He would throw them in the creek, and he would throw them over by a train bridge that still stands to this day. So that's how he was able to get rid of the body, except for one piece, and that's what that piece is what got him arrested.
Now, from the time he had killed her, was there another killing that he did from a traveling salesman or something like that? Or was that before he married Olive?
Yeah, that was before he married Olive. That was before even his second marriage. He killed two people that he confessed to, but there could be others. From his days when he lived in a place called Richland, which it used to be just outside of Shiloh, Ohio. And that area now is just nothing but cornfields. But he had a boarding house that he ran there. And the first person he killed was a shopkeeper named Noah Hall. And he had a general store in Richland. And back then, instead of like what stores nowadays, they get a delivery every day of stuff they want to sell in their store. In those days, they would take their wagon out east to like New York City or Philadelphia or Boston, and they would buy their goods there and then bring them back to their store to sell them in town. And they would make that trip at least once a year. And he knew from talking to Noah Hall that he was getting ready to make a trip to out east. And Noah Hall even mentioned he had like $800 saved up to go and buy all the stuff necessary to sell in his store for the coming year. And back then, $800 is, in today's money, would be like maybe $23,000, somewhere in there. And so Returned Ward decided he's going to kill Noah Hall and take his money. And that's exactly what he did. And he tried to frame a pair of brothers in town as being the ones that did it, because they were known for being, they were known for burglary and stuff like that. They were known for all kinds of petty crimes, but not so much murder. And they didn't have enough evidence to convict them, and people began to suspect that Ward was the one that did it, but they just had no evidence to put him on trial. And then a year later, a traveling tin peddler came to town and got a room for the night at Ward's boarding house. And this guy was selling like tin plates, tin silverware, tin cups, stuff like that, and probably some other stuff too. But Ward had dinner with the man. They retired to a sitting room, had cigars, and were just talking. And then the tin peddler, the only name that we're given is Mr. Lovejoy. Lovejoy went into his room for the night because he had to get up and start down the road again in the morning to sell some more of his stuff. And Ward sat awake in his bed thinking, he's a traveling salesman. He's probably got some money on him. Who's going to miss him? If he comes up missing, nobody's going to know what happened to him, because back then Ohio was like the frontier. If you came up missing, people just assumed it was the natives that got you, or you ran afoul somewhere, or maybe the buggy ran off the road somewhere and you died in a ditch. Nobody knows. So this is the perfect opportunity for him. And he ended up killing Lovejoy. Didn't get hardly anything for, I think he made like $25. So he ended up taking a lot of the tin items that he was selling for himself, and then he amputated the peddler's legs so he could fit into like a shipping crate. He loaded that shipping crate onto a wagon and traveled about 60 miles north to his father's farm, on the Huron River and just chucked the crate into the river. And everybody kind of suspected he did it, or that something was foul, because Ward had a young lady worked as like a housekeeper sort of thing, and she had come in the next day for work, and she was going to go make up the Mr. Lovejoy's room for the next tenant, get it ready. And Ward's like, no, you don't need to. I already took care of it. And she thought this was kind of weird because Ward had never done something like that. It was always her job. He would never bring himself to doing something like that. So she went up and checked anyway to be sure, and then immediately left the building and did not return to work ever again. She saw something, but she never described what she saw. So he missed something in his cleanup after killing that guy. And he left town after that and started making his way to Sylvania. As far as I know, I'm sure there was an investigation into what happened to Lovejoy, but we haven't found those records. And it was maybe 15 years later or so that Richland itself was wiped off the map. They describe a windstorm came and just like decimated most of the town. And I'm assuming that meant a tornado. So it's pure speculation as to what she might have seen, but it was enough to spook him to leave the area and head north and hopefully try to outrun the law, which he did for that one.
So it sounds like he really had the makings of being a full-blown serial killer, but a very stupid one. He didn't seem to cover his tracks very well.
Right. I got the impression reading his confession that he was cold-blooded to do it. He didn't really care about, it didn't bother him taking a life. But it's almost as if like after the act was done, that's when he snapped to reality and was like, oh crap, what do I do now? He didn't plan it out. Now he's got to deal with the aftermath of it and hope he can, make it go away so that nobody knows. He's just a bumbling serial killer, if you can call him that.
And it seems to me that he made a mistake when he was marrying Olive, because she seemed to have a lot of friends and very social, whereas he was the exact opposite. So I'm sure there was a lot of people who knew what was going on eventually, and we're going to look out for her.
Yeah, she was very well liked, and so it was noticed right away that there's no way. She had already mentioned that she doesn't feel safe with the guy, and now he's telling people that they're going on vacation or that she's left and moving away. Olive never said goodbye. It just didn't make sense to anybody. They knew something was up, and they just had to figure out how they were going to find out. How were they going to bring justice to this woman? And like I said, his house was 16 by 20, and they searched it twice. And even though they found spots of blood here and there, they didn't really find anything that would really hold up in court or that would answer any of the questions they had. It wasn't until the final search of the house where they uncovered the evidence they needed to have him arrested. And even during the first couple searches, they did find a lot of ash in the stove. They found some small bones in the stove, and he was able to just talk his way out of it. He said, no, those are chicken bones. I guess that was a common thing to do back then, was when you're done eating anything with bones in it, you just throw the bones in the stove and just burn them away. So he had an answer for every question they had. And even though they didn't really trust the answers, they really had nothing else to go on to try and arrest. I mean, he was arrested once, but they let him go because there just wasn't evidence. One of the things that really helped him was the one time they took him into custody, they sent somebody to Adrian to go look for Olive, to say that she's back home, she's alive, he didn't kill her. Well, this guy came back and said he saw Olive. He didn't talk to her, but he saw her, and it was obviously misidentification, because they let him go. And once they let him go, Ward went into overdrive, getting rid of the body and getting the ashes spread out everywhere he could. So it was between his bumbling behavior and a lot of, luck that came his way that he made it as far as he did. He just overlooked one key piece of evidence, and that's what got him hung.
So there's a couple of things in there from your estimation would be a cause of a haunting. One is residual from the fact that they probably had a lot of energy going back and forth, doing their daily routines while they were living together, etc. And the other would be after the fact when he was trying to dispose of the body, ashes, etc.
Yeah, you can almost imagine what was going through his head as he knew he's sitting in his house with a dead body or pieces of a dead body. And he knows the people outside those walls are looking at him knowing he did it. He knows that his time is limited. They'll be coming for him any minute. I mean, the amount of stress that he's under, it's got to be off the charts. And that type of energy, that mindset, I would say that could definitely leave a heck of an impression on an environment that could still be felt to this day. In fact, in the 1930s, a guy who was a kid prior to the Great Fire in Sylvania had written a letter describing what Sylvania looked like prior to the fire. He went through and he listed all the different buildings and what business was in the buildings. And he came to Return Ward's house, and he said that this is where the Taylor lived that killed his wife, and kids back then knew to stay away from the house, otherwise the ghosts would come out and get you. So, and this is like 1880s that this, he remembers this from as a kid. So just 30 years after the murder, there's already a ghost story circulating. Now, whether it's just kids trying to scare each other or not, or if there's actual sightings, we don't know. But yeah, the amount of arguing and the yelling going on in that house, the tension and the stress, and then the murder, and then what he went through mentally. I mean, when you think about what it takes to dismember a human body and burn it and cut it up, and that's got to take a toll, no matter who you are. If you're a psychopath or not, it's got to take a toll on you mentally, and that energy goes straight into, the location around you, the ground, the wood, everything. It just permeates everything.
It's just, Dostoevsky would love this story. Crime and punishment down to a T of not just the murder, but the psychological effects afterwards and the imprint that's going to make. It's got to be fascinating if anybody did a study of his behavior after the murder. Did he talk to, how many people did he talk to? What was his demeanor, and et cetera? Can you imagine this, even being a psychic around that sort of energy would be? Ugh.
Well, it's limited information about his time in jail. He was obviously worried about the outcome. I do remember something about he was upset that people were making fun of him. I wish I could remember the story now. He was being teased in jail. Oh hell, I can't remember the story. But he's the perpetual victim. Everybody's against him. And I think by the time he made it to prison or jail, Lucas County Jail, he had probably gone into like a survival mode, so he wasn't even really feeling the effects of what happened, of what he went through. And then it was when he made his confession, he was told by his lawyer, do not confess, because he actually had the support of the public behind him. There was, during the trial, the piece of jawbone that they found, it wasn't a full intact jawbone. And there was enough defense witnesses saying it could be, it could be a dog bone, part of a dog jaw, it could be this, and even the prosecution witnesses could not state 100% if that was a human jawbone. So because of that evidence and because of no body, no crime, it almost looked like he was going to get off. And he was told not to confess by his lawyer. And it was, the old, you would hear about the dime novels back then that were popular, like Billy the Kid and Jesse James. Mm-hmm. And one of those publishers came to him for his story, and he couldn't resist. And he gave a full confession, and that's pretty much what got him the death penalty. It turned the public sentiment against him.
Yep. If he only waited until he was acquitted.
Well, he would have been sentenced. I think he would have gotten away with life, or maybe whatever life. I don't think life meant their full life in prison, but whatever it was, I don't think he would have gotten an execution out of it. But the confession pretty much damned him to hang at the Lucas County Courthouse.
Wow.
Now, how long was he in jail for?
Oh, not long. The trial started in March. I think it ended. Yeah, I think the whole trial lasted for March, and then he was hung June 12th. So there were no lengthy appeals processes or sitting on death row or anything. It was, you're guilty. We're going to schedule a date, and you're done.
Wow. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and take us a quick break. It'll be about 5-6 minutes. So just remember the mics are live, and we will be back then. We will take a quick break, so stay tuned, everybody.